In this tutorial, I'm already starting with a track that I've composed. I'm looking for the right drum sound, so I'm going to go through my collection of famous drum breaks to find the right sample for me. For this track, I'm using an incredibly famous drum break. This track is Impeach the President. What I'm going to do is import this into my DAW, and I'm going to cut it up into a rhythm of my own choosing to fit the track that I've created. I'm just going to cut this up manually on my timeline and use the slice tool to cut out my core components. So I've got the kick, the snare, the hat, and depending on your drum break, you can use anything else in particular. I've got far more control here to set the transients, start and end point where I find is the best. Also just to fade in and out to make sure that there are no clicks in the audio. Then I'm going to export all of these individual components so that they become their own audio files. And I use Native Instruments Battery 4 as a cell-based grid. So I load each of my drum parts into Battery, and then I'll just assign a key on the MIDI keyboard to be able to put in a live performance and make the drums sound how I want them to sound. Cool, so now I've got a drum pattern I like. I'm just going to do some tweaking, so I'm going to just tune these notes slightly to make sure that it definitely fits the track key that I've created. So here I'll just begin to tweak the sounds to make sure things are sounding as I like them to. There are some components here that are sounding a bit flat, so I'm going to use Battery 4's own drum sample library just to add more of these components and make it a much fuller, richer sound. Then I create a drum bus, which means that all of my drum tracks are going to be going into this same mixing chain. You can do your individual EQ on each of the tracks, of course. One of my little secrets for getting a really cool like lo-fi or organic sound that sounds less overproduced is to run the drums through a guitar amp effects rig. So I'll add that into the bus. And there are so many different effects, and I've just changed the level to have as much of that effect as I desire, basically. Then I also add a compressor to the chain just to glue everything together and make sure that the drums are bouncing along fine. And something else to think about is the relationship between your drums and your bass. I did a previous tutorial on sidechain compression for bass, so definitely revisit that to make sure that your drums are sounding really good and aren't fighting for the same space as your bass.